Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Amandra Bhatt. Today we talk about India's relations with China. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was on a two-day visit to India, during which he held talks with his counterpart Sushma Swaraj. He also called on President Pranab Mukherjee and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. During the talks with our External Affairs Minister, all issues of significance were covered between the two sides. This particular visit, in fact, comes at a time when the new government in India at center has taken charge, and it comes amidst hopes of a new start in relations between India and China. Whether or not this particular visit marks a new chapter in India's relations with China, we discuss. And to discuss the same, we are joined in our studios by three distinguished guests. Please welcome Professor Sreeram Chaulia, a Dean in Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to Insight, Professor Chaulia. Professor Chaulia, how do you see this visit? As Ambassador Kumar said, insofar as atmospherics are concerned, there is a positive spin to this particular visit by the Chinese Foreign Minister. We are definitely seeing a positive momentum in ties, aren't we?
Yeah, I think the Chinese have been pretty captivated by Modi's rise because the fact that they have a prior relationship to him in a different capacity when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat.
Right.
And there, of course, it was all commerce. And I think he's made 4, some people are saying even 5 visits to China in the past. So they have an established relationship. And I think they also would like to believe that Modi will be somehow strategically a little more distant from the US, and although that is open to dispute, but essentially the fact that there has been some, because the Chinese view India's position in the world vis-a-vis how it's aligning or not aligning with the US. So I think right now they are of the opinion that if they catch him early and do the right, hit the right notes at the beginning, perhaps they could. I think the grand strategy of Chinese always to woo India away from the US and to prevent any kind of ganging up of the 2 major democracies of the world. So I think that is their goal, but I'm sure Modi is smarter than that to fall for it. But essentially, I think they're looking at these 2 angles. One is to promote the economic relationship. They've promised all kinds of investments for infrastructure growth and so on. But even there's a catch. I mean, strategically speaking, if you're a realist, you wouldn't want your potential competitor to catch up with you economically. But the Chinese are saying we'll do everything for India's growth. So are you in a way enabling the rise of a competitor in your own backyard? I think there will be people within the Chinese establishment will be saying, let's go slow on this too. But these are the bigger questions. Overall, yeah, definitely his affinity towards the Asian powers, people are saying China and Japan are far more important for this new government, and maybe redressing some imbalance from the past, where Dr. Manmohan Singh was more, very closely allied with, attuned towards the US. I think maybe there is some kind of shift that's happening, and the Chinese expect to try and, move it forward.
Okay, so we are going to see an upswing in bilateral ties from now on.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are downsides. I mean, remember, Lobsang Sangay, the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile, was sitting at the Modi.
Right, Professor Chaulia, I'll continue with you on the question of trade. The 2 sides are wanting to take the trade beyond the existing $65 billion annually, and for that we are looking at tapping the untapped potential, the untapped opportunities that exist between the 2 sides. What do you think are the key areas where we should focus? Infrastructure is of course one.
Yeah. The basic problem I think with the trade relationship is we are 2 different types of economies. We don't have a big manufacturing base. We don't sell a lot of finished products to them. We give mostly raw materials like cotton, minerals, and so on. And automatically, terms of trade will be unfavorable to the ones who sell primary products. The ones who sell manufactured products will have an advantage. And secondly, although it's not very widely spoken about, the value of the renminbi vis-a-vis the dollar does impact the trade deficit with us, like it does with other countries, because we exchange in dollars, and so all these things matter, and we have been raising this for a long time. So what is the potential? Obviously, the FDI, inward FDI can offset some of the trade balance. Secondly, we have not made a fuss about it, like, for example, the Brazilians have actually openly protested against the Chinese for a trade imbalance and for rectifying the yuan undervaluation. But what we have said is, we will sort it out bilaterally. But if it's now climbing to really $40 billion, it's a matter of concern. So the only thing the Chinese can do, if they really want to live up to their promise of making it a more equal and fair exchange, is open up market access to some of our manufacturers, even if whether we are able to be competitive in those markets is a different question, because there will be so many others who would be exporting to China apart from Indians. So eventually, whether we can win market access, a lot of it depends on our own domestic economic vitality and strength, and whether, in fact, Mr. Jaitley had mentioned just before the election to the Wall Street Journal, we are inspired by Chinese model and we want to do heavy industrialization in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we do build a heavy industrial base, then we can really compete with them, better, and I think we will address it. So some of it is structural.
Okay.
I think one area which is often not spoken about is green technology. The Chinese dominate a lot of the hardware in alternative energy, and we do need it, and their prices are far more competitive vis-a-vis the Western ones. So if we have to adapt it, obviously we also want to develop our own indigenous technology. But say, why reinvent the wheel when the Chinese have done it at a lower cost? We might as well import it and benefit from it, But at the same time, what can we export that they don't have? Clearly, the old mantra about we being software and they being hardware has been spoken about. There's a complementarity. There are different types of economies. We need to harness that. I think that's the only way.
Professor Chaulia, before we come to the contentious issues, let's focus on infrastructure for a bit. China, we understand they are investing in mega infrastructure projects in our neighborhood, be it Gwadar or Hambantota. Even Bangladesh, we are told, is seeking Chinese help in building a deep sea port. What do you think is the scope when it comes to cooperation with China on infrastructure?
I think on non-critical infrastructure areas, by which I mean those which are not sensitive to national security directly, like telecommunications, I think we can open up other. See, we are starved of financing for most of these. So we are willing to take it. I mean, money, whether it's Japanese or Chinese or American, will still count. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't come with any bugging device. Telecom sector, I would be more wary. In fact, Mr. Modi had gone to Huawei in China and had set up a research center in Gujarat. But intelligence agencies have pointed out repeatedly there's a problem with this. Huawei and ZTZ, the Chinese telecom companies, are known to be like Trojan horses, carrying backdoors, as they call them, for pilfering information and so on. Cyber, all cyber realm, any network equipment and hardware infrastructure which relates to our communications, I think we should be absolutely close to them. I mean, it's a national security issue. But on other fronts, I mean, roads, ports, I think there's plenty of Chinese. And unlike in Africa, where the Chinese have done this infrastructure with a lot of conditionalities for energy and so on, they're not going to get anything out of us except that we are going to repay the loan with some interest, So I think we will not become dependent to them. Okay. Some people are giving the example of how Chinese have, taken over Africa using infrastructure as a kind of entry point. But I don't think India is that small, or we are strategically far more, prepared in the last 50, 60 years to ensure that it doesn't become a dependent relationship. So I think if it's a win-win in the form of financing that gives them like a build, operate, transfer kind of model, the Chinese can make some money out of it and park their capital in productive ways in a growing economy like India. Okay. I think it will be good for them, and we need to be watchful, but certainly take what comes along the way.
Okay, Professor Chaulia, what do you think? How will the new government engage with China on this question of history, the border issue, which has become a major headache for our government because there are incursions that keep happening. There was this Depsang Valley incident in April last year.
Yeah, I think they need to speed up the defense modernization. So it's like talk softly but carry a big stick. It's always worked in international affairs. So yes, let us continue to have cooperation and give out all the politically correct communiques. But the key is, I think, if you're stronger with the Mountain Strike Corps, with all these things coming up along the line of actual control, I think eventually the Chinese themselves see that it's futile to try and nibble and take some territory here or there and challenge Indian sovereignty here and there. So I think eventually, in a way, it's like you need also some kind of a balance. Of course, China is much larger than us, but conventionally and nuclear wise, we need to ramp up significantly. That will be part of the foreign policy. You cannot separate the defense from the foreign policy. And I think I hope that Mr. Modi will energize the defense modernization also, because we are, unlike the Chinese, we are still dependent so much on imports and so on. The Chinese have indigenized their defense industrial complex significantly, and they don't accept, of course, on energy they are still dependent on imports from the Middle East, but we are dependent both on energy and military on imports, and that makes us much weaker in terms of bargaining with the Chinese. So I think we need to establish some fait accompli on our side and be stronger.
But will the new government's approach be any different? Because Mr. Modi did refer to China rather aggressively in his election campaign.
Yeah, so
election is over.
You think we're going to see a more pragmatic approach?
No, I think when it comes down to territory, I think the RSS and the BJP have always been pretty firm. And if something like Daulat Beg Goldi happens, I think India will reserve the right to even use force to push them back, on a limited scale.
Professor Chaulia, that's another cause of unease, China's continued support to Pakistan, the all-weather friendship that these two countries enjoy. What do you think? And then there's also the issue of Chinese military build-up in POK.
Well, I think if Modi think tank is smart, they should also think about how we can drive a wedge in this all-weather relationship, especially on the issue of Islamic extremism and terrorism. I mean, most recently, this spate of terrorist attacks have happened in Xinjiang, all attributed to the so-called East Turkestan Islamic movement, and most of these have trained in Pakistan. And even though Chinese sometimes exaggerate the threat in order to clamp down and because of the racist approach to minorities, but nonetheless, it is a fact that our Lashkar-e-Taiba and their East Turkestan Islamic movement are all, birds of the same feather, and they flock together in Pakistan. So the Chinese in the past, what they've done is to try and, reach some kind of bilateral, tacit agreement with the Pakistani leaders, saying, you control these people, please, and we'll give you, whatever else you want in terms of nuclear and military and missiles and some form of aid. So I think what we need to do is we have to find common cause with Chinese on some points. Of course, the overall Chinese strategy has always been that, Pakistan should be like an albatross around our neck and we should tie us down within South Asia. That is part of their grand strategy, and I don't think, frankly, although they would deny it, it's obvious in their policies. But I don't think we can expect that the Chinese will drop that idea, because that's how they feel they can control India's rise and keep it limited. But what we can do is on specific issue areas, such as Islamic extremism, there's no harm talking to Chinese. Let us set up some kind of a mechanism for intelligence sharing jointly between Chinese and Indians on controlling this export coming from Pakistan. I mean, these are innovative ideas that we can implement on a small scale. And I don't think the Chinese will be anathematic, because the attacks are rising in Xinjiang and even outside Xinjiang, in Kunming, in Beijing and so on of late. So they are unable to handle it all by themselves. They will need regional cooperation. And India is the #1 victim of Islamic terrorism and jihadism in the past. So we have common cause. We need to strike out together.
Professor Chaulia, our engagement with the US and Japan likely to cause unease clearly in Beijing.
Yeah, but I think we have to dehyphenate, for a long time I think the Chinese also realize. See, initially they began with the notion that India is somehow a kind of a junior partner of the United States, and that we are doing their bidding. But over time we have shown it. I mean, we have our own problems with the US as well. It's not necessarily true that everything is hunky-dory with them. So I think they realize that as an independent power, we want to be a great power. We don't want to be a satellite of anybody. So I think that is going to assure them to some extent. But nonetheless, I mean, they are always afraid of the encirclement by the US and its allies. And of course, we will never be an ally of the US like Japan is an ally. So I think to that extent, they realize that India is different. And of course, we are part of the BRICS forum, and we believe in a multipolar world and all those things. So we have common cause with the Chinese. But at the same time, they will always be worried whenever we get stronger with Japan or stronger with the US, because it has a, it's like unintentionally also,
Okay.
it has some impact in shrinking the strategic space for maneuver for China.
All right. Well, I'm afraid I have to leave it at that, but we can only hope that as the two countries seek to take their ties forward, all this bonhomie and the positivity translates into something more concrete. With that, it's time for me to wrap up this discussion here. I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you all here. That's it for now in this edition of Insight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.